Well, okay, it's 6:36, and I said we would start the meeting at 6:35. So let's go ahead and start. And welcome to the second Zoom DUPS meeting that we've had. So this is great. It's wonderful to see you all. And I know the big topic of conversation, of course, is everybody with our shots and getting our shots, and that's been great that we're getting inoculated to this, hopefully. And the other is the bad weather that we had. I think you guys even had snow down in Houston, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so really tough. I know I talked to Lily the other day, and she was saying they had some broken pipes and some damages. Talked to Bob Hughes, and he was without water for several days and flooded a whole floor of his house out at the lake. So he wasn't real happy about that, but he was happy if you didn't see the notice on Facebook that Bob and Debbie finally got married. And for those of y'all that don't know Bob and Debbie, this is after 34 years.
Oh, what was the
And
rush?
it's their second marriage for both of them, so I guess they wanted to be sure. But yeah, but they're real excited. And he said, well, it was he said, I really didn't have a honeymoon. He said, we got married, we kissed, and I got in the car and drove to Hillsboro, Texas to check on his house down there, which was ended up being flooded. And so he was down there for the whole week and then just came back. So
Be sure and congratulate them if you see them sometime.
yeah, and he looks at the DUPS Facebook page, and so so that's good. Richard Todd already had a meeting scheduled for tonight. Richard is our photo contest chairperson, and he had a meeting already scheduled for tonight, so he's not here. But if you haven't seen it yet, you will see an email from him. We were going to announce the winners tonight of our photo contest, except we have a 4-way tie in the open division. So, you know, we have to vote by Wednesday. So that's okay. We had a record number of entrants in the intermediate, excuse me, and the advanced division. So that's wonderful. Yay. Congratulations, everyone. It shows that interest is there, and that is just great. Now, I neglected to announce some of our people that are here tonight that are not necessarily DUPS members. So I'll start off by I'm not going to do the formal invitation. I'm going to leave that to Dave, but David Lenderman is the speaker tonight, and he's the president of the Houston Underwater Photographic Society. And the Houston Club is actually the club that got us going and started as a club. David, would you like to introduce the people that you see that are here from Hoops?
Sure, we have. I don't know if they're in the same spot on your screen or not, but on the bottom there, raise your hand, Tom Collier. Tom. So Tom's a longtime member and been president and board member, and it's our treasurer right now. So thank you, Tom, for doing that. And then we have Tammy Allen, who's been also a member forever. And Tammy's our secretary, and has been for years. Joe Hawes, he's up there, and he's our trip coordinator, but we didn't do much in the way of trips last year. So maybe in the future, we'll get some more of those rolling. And Joe's been around a number of years also. And
makes for an easy job.
Yeah, it's an easy job when there's no travel. And I guess, PJ, you're a HUPS member or not? I know you're down in our area anyways. You're on mute.
Hit your space bar.
You're on mute.
One.
You're still on mute.
Okay, so much for the space bar.
There we go.
So I'm consistently inconsistent because I live far away, and the last meeting that I was able to come into town for was only because Dennis was my chauffeur, because he lives close by. because I just, it's just at night driving that long a ride. I've become a wimp in my old age,
Well,
but
and-
not a wimp diver.
There you
That's
go.
an important thing.
Well, Dennis, speaking of Dennis, he just texted me and said he couldn't find the link, so I emailed it to him. So I think Dennis will probably log on in a minute.
Oh, yes,
Oh, great.
he's there
He's
right
the vice
now.
president. Oh, he's in the waiting room.
Excellent. Excellent. Let's see what Methuselah looks like tonight.
Still no haircut, huh, Dennis? You're on mute.
He's still connecting. There he is. You're muted, Dennis.
Yeah, I just, somehow or the other, it wasn't letting me in.
Yep.
Because they have a waiting room. So anyway, I think that's it for the HUPS crews that are on here.
And we're happy to be your guests tonight.
Yes, thank you.
We are happy to
Oh,
have
look
you.
at there,
And-
Marty's here. We're going to see you in a few days.
Yeah.
Well,
Tomorrow.
like tomorrow, right?
Secombe. Is Jim Secombe?
Hey,
maybe-
Barry.
Name wrong.
The Mass Marauder.
Ah. Hey, Jim. Down here in the line.
Am I the only Jim here or what?
No, there's a Jim Secombe down at the, I see him on the bottom of my screen.
I didn't want to be rude and not respond.
Yeah, no, not you, Keller. We got two Jims now. And also, Marty Snyderman has joined us again tonight. And thank you, Marty,
Yay,
for joining us.
Hi, all.
And,
Hi, Marty.
Marty has a friend that he has invited, and they've got something special that they're going to talk to us about. It'll take just a moment. Marty, you want to introduce Eric?
Yeah, sure, everybody. That's Eric Reich. Eric, raise your hand or make, there's Eric. Eric's my partner in a project on some ebooks. Eric lives in Jacksonville. And Barry, are we doing that now, or are you just saying hi and introducing everybody?
Yeah, let's just see if we have any other business, and then we'll let you guys talk. They asked
Eric speaks. He can say words. Go ahead, Eric. Say hi to everybody.
Eric. As a matter of fact, when you were gone, Eric jumped in and we said hi to Eric.
Good.
Do any of our other members, do you have anything that you need to talk about? Board members? Nope, everybody's good? Okay. And I had one more announcement, and that is that Linda Briggs is in McKinney today selling her artwork. So she's really come along in her artwork, and she's got a booth out there. So she's not here. So she asked us to record, or I said that we would record, and she would be able to see the meeting, because she really wanted to see everybody too. So Marty, why don't you tell us what you and Eric have going?
Okay, thank you. We'll kick it off. We'll be quick. So first of all, thank you guys for having us. We're here because we have just formed a company. We are producing ebooks. We've got a company called wisedivers.com, and I'm going to show you our first book. We just released it this weekend, and appropriately, it is 101 tips for underwater photographers. And we just released it. And what I'm going to do is just share my screen real quick. And you see the cover of it right now?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the cover of the ebook. And I'm going to stop that and just show you a couple of things about the book. If I can get to the right place, there we go. So what it is, it really is just 101 tips, and some of them are one page, some of them are 2 pages, but this happens to be, I think everybody can see this. This is tip number 4. Just as when you think you're close to your subject, get closer. When you've done that, get even closer. Close matters, and a little explanation down below. And this particular tip happens to be, whoops, I went the wrong direction here. A couple of pages. But most of the tips are either 1 or 2 pages. There's the next one. It just kind of give you the idea of the format of the book. And tip number 6. So some of the tips are about in-water techniques. Some of them are about things you might do before your dive. And I'm going to just kind of scroll through here real quick. And some of it is things you do when you're setting up your gear to do and not to do, so that you can keep the water on the outside of all your camera gear. So this one has to do with lubricating O-rings and cleaning seals. And we'd love, you know, we're real excited about it. It's kind of consumed our weekend. And I'm going to let Eric tell you how to buy it. So first thing, I think everybody's supposed to run. They don't even need to run and go get their wallet. I think you can do this all online. So you guys keep your seat. And I was going to start this by telling you, I'm in San Diego right now, but I growed up in Arkansas, as I say. So I was going to teach you guys how to sing. I don't give a damn about the whole state of Texas. I'm from Arkansas, but I was thinking that's probably a bad sales technique. I wouldn't do that. So I'm going to give it to Eric and be quick. Thanks, Barry. Appreciate you guys letting us be here.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Marty, if you stop your share, I'll share my screen and I'll show you our website. So how you would see our book. And there you go. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So this is our website's wisedivers.com, and it has our book that we just released, as well as a couple upcoming books we have. So if you click on the book cover, or you can click our books at the top, it takes you to a page that has a little more information about our book. We have the sample pages, kind of like Marty just showed you. And then it also has direct links to Apple Books and Amazon, which is where our books are available. We also have a compatible devices link at the top. If you click that, it'll show you the requirements for putting it on your iPhone or your iPad or your desktop computer on Mac. Or if you get it from Amazon, you can put it on a Kindle reader, or you can put it on, Kindle has an app that'll go on to your Windows device or your Android device. So we have it available for a lot of different formats. You can also give our books as a gift. So if you have someone else you want to share the book with, and we have instructions on how to do that on both Amazon and Apple. You can join our Facebook page up here or our Instagram page and follow us and find out about our upcoming books. So again, thanks so much for having us tonight, and we really appreciate it.
Hey, Eric, two things real quick. And the rock bottom price is
$12.99.
And you can give it as a gift by scrolling down. How do you do? So
you would click right to Amazon, and this is a screen that you would see on Amazon, and there's a button right here that says share, buy for others. And then same with Apple, you would click below, and we have instructions how to do that on the Apple.
Roll yourself down so you can see yourself. Oops, sorry.
So thanks, guys. Barry gave us 3 minutes and told us not to be 3 minutes and 1 second. We made it. We're at 2:58, and we appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, thank you. You bet.
Thanks, Marty.
Just a quick comment. That's really great. I saw it online just yesterday or the day before, I think.
Just yesterday,
and
I
signed
think.
up for your Facebook. And what I'd like to do is to order at least one for tomorrow's meeting, and we'll have a drawing for it.
Oh, pick me as the winner.
Thank you so much.
I would say thank you. How would, I'm not sure. I guess what we'd have to do is have the drawing and then have that person sign up so they can get it on their own. That's why I've got Eric here. He's the brains of this thing. I'm the beauty. We're in trouble.
Yes, you can do that. You'll be able to gift it to that person and just put in their email address and send it right to them.
Yeah,
Super.
That's why I would do it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate that.
Super.
Yeah.
Well, it's a nice service. Are you also offering a whole panoply of books, other people's?
I didn't know what that word is, but then again, I went to public school in Arkansas, so I'm going to confess here. I think you said like a whole bunch of those books at one time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
So
that's
our
what
second
it is.
our second and third books we're really very close to releasing them. So like a couple of months, but we are still in the process of laying them out, and so the answer would be not as a package, at least at this time. And they really are kind of, they're going to all appeal to the world of divers, but not every diver is an underwater photographer. It just happens to be what we did first, and certainly it's my interest. And I can see Barry frowning at me here because I'm gonna go over.
No,
time.
no, you're fine.
Okay.
You are going to go over this tomorrow night with us, aren't you?
Be more than happy to. Absolutely.
I'll save
I'm
my
taking
question
that
for
as a
tomorrow
formal
then.
invitation.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Next, we'll have Dave introduce Dave and Dave Wheeler introduce Dave Lenderman, and then we'll turn the meeting over to Dave Lenderman for his presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Mary. Well, it's been interesting because, you know, we tried a Zoom meeting with Marty. It went real well. We decided that, heck, this is the way we're going to need to do things till we can get together again. And that's a question that we're going to be addressing real soon as more and more people get the vaccination. But Barry suggested I reach out to David Lenderman. And since then, I think I've emailed David Lenderman more than I've emailed my wife in the last month. Because it started out, I asked him if he would do us the honor of doing a presentation for us. He said, sure. And so I said, good, we meet the third Sunday of every month. And he said, I'm good for that. And then I went, whoa, wait a minute. It'd be such a short notice to pull it off on the third Sunday. So how about tonight? Yep, okay, we're good with that. And then he said, I have two topics, negative space and taking sharper underwater photographs. And I said, dang, the contest this month is negative space. However, if you did that, everybody's already got that would been a great, wonderful January subject for a February negative space contest. So we decided we'd go with the sharper thing. David is the president of the Houston group. He needs no introduction to you folks from Houston. And Linda has put out his bio to everyone that's in the DUPS group. But basically, he fell in love with scuba diving and found that underwater photography was the right way to share his passion and his newfound love of the underwater with people that don't dive. He's an avid underwater photographer, and I think we're going to find out he's a great presenter as well. So without further ado, DUPS, here's David Lenderman.
So now here's the real part. How long do your meetings usually last, or your programs usually last?
About 45 minutes.
Okay, we should be really good then.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure you weren't going to say 20 minutes or something. So, anyways, we're going to talk about getting sharper images tonight. Just out of curiosity, if you're wondering what I shoot, I currently shoot a Nikon D7200 and CNC housing with CNC strobes. Big blue focus light. Figure Barry would like that. And I also use a Stix buoyancy floats on the strobe arms, which makes a huge difference. Back in the early days, I remember my camera was always so heavy, and then I got those floats and it was like, oh gosh, this is a huge difference. I love them. I typically shoot everything in manual. So I guess if we're going to talk about sharpness, we probably need to define sharpness. It can be defined in many different ways. If you Google it up, photographic sharpness, you'll get a lot of different ideas how to describe it, but I like to keep it real simple. And sharpness is the clarity of detail in an image. So we're going to talk about some causes of soft images. Marty mentioned it in his little 101 tip book right there, was shooting through too much water, big one. Motion blur, high ISO noise, excessive cropping, poor focus on the subject. Then other minor ones you run into once in a while are incompatible lens port combinations and even dirty lenses or ports. So we're going to sort of break these down item by item and talk about these problems and how to solve them. So shooting through too much water. It's very common for new underwater photographers. And just because you see a subject from a certain location doesn't mean you should shoot it from there. As Marty mentioned in his book there, is that you really always want to get closer than you think you are. If you're close, you always need to get closer. You just cannot really get too close. And this is like Marty's book. He had a picture of a shark taken from far away. And this is actually taken with a 60mm macro lens. It just happened to be swimming by. I didn't have anything else I was photographing at the time. And so I took a picture of it knowing it wasn't going to be great, but I did what I could in Lightroom. And, you know, it's not too bad, but it's not sharp as it should be, you know, for a really sharp underwater image. And this one was taken with a Tokina 10-17, I think is what it is, or 10-17, I think, all the way at 10 millimeter. So this shark is probably maybe 6 to 10 inches or something away from the dome port, very, very close. And so you get a lot sharper image by shooting through less water. So, you know, even clear water has a substantial amount of particles that will degrade your image. If you're diving in like a muck dive with murky water, even just a foot or 6 inches can really make a big difference between a you know, clouded image versus a sharp image. So it really pays to get as close as possible. Just what it says, it's important to reduce the amount of water between you and your subject. And one way to do that is to use lenses that allow you to get really close, such as dedicated macro lenses that will close focus, very, very closely focus. And fisheye lenses, so if you're shooting something big or wide angle, the coverage of the fisheye is so wide that you can get very close to that large subject and still get the whole thing in the frame. And it's also very important to shoot subjects that fit your lens. You know, I see people out there with macro lenses and are trying to shoot sharks, like the example I showed a while ago, or who knows what, you know, big things. So you have to learn to say pass on some of those subjects if they're not really suited to your lens. And the side benefit is by getting closer, you'll be amazed of how much less backscatter you get in your images when you get super close to things. So how close, I get that question, is, you know, macro, usually I'm shooting subjects that's a couple inches away, a few inches to maybe 2 feet from my lens. And then for wide angle, I'm usually shooting like 1 to 2 feet away. The only time I'd ever shoot further would be like a shipwreck or a whale shark or something really, really big. You know, with a fisheye lens at 2 feet, you can get a whole lot of reef in your frame. So there's usually not much reason to get further away than that. And, you know, I say, you know, more than 3 feet away from your subject is really too far. Unless, again, it's like a whale shark or a wreck or something really, really large. So some tips on how to get close. You know, a lot of newer divers really have a problem getting close to the subjects because they tend to scare them away or crash into them or what have you. But, you know, the #1 tip I have at how to get close to your subjects is slow down. You know, if you're going real slow, moving slowly and non-threatening while you're diving, a lot of the subjects will allow you to approach more closely. Having really good buoyancy control is extremely important so you can get close to the reef without crashing into it. And it's also important to adjust your trim so your body is horizontal. You know, a lot of times people may have good buoyancy control, but their natural position in the water is such that their fins are hanging down. And that's not really good if you're trying to photograph something on the reef. And so by adjusting your weights and trim so your body is more horizontal, it allows your face and your camera to get much closer to the reef without kicking it. Particularly on my BC, I use trim weights really up high on the back next to my tank. And that really helps push my face down and keep my face so it's close to the reef so I can shoot photos. Use slow, relaxed breathing. Again, you know, tends not to scare the fish away and such. And where it's loud, using a muck stick is nice. So if you're diving, you know, a muck dive in Indonesia or somewhere, most people use the muck sticks. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it's like a little metal rod you hold in your one hand, and you can use that to poke into the sand to hold your position without having to touch the sand or flail about and kicking up all that muck and sand. It really helps a lot to stabilize yourself. And also I always preach to be patient and find a really brave or dumb fish, because, you know, you may see, you know, 10 different queen angelfish, for example, on a dive in Cozumel, and most of them may run away from you, but there's that one every once in a while that is not afraid of you at all and will allow you to approach very closely. And so like I said, I don't know if they're brave or they're dumb, but, you know, take advantage of those critters when you come across them. So on to the next topic of unsharp images. And I just want to say again that if anybody has a question, feel free to ask. I'm open for questions. So motion blur, you know, can be caused by the camera moving or the subject moving. Obviously it's important to hold your camera still when shooting. Especially if you're shooting at slower speeds, you really need to focus on holding that camera steady. And there are times I shoot quite slowly on land and underwater with low light situations, or if I'm trying to get the blue water to show, particularly in a macro shot, shooting at a longer shutter speed, it's real important to be still. So if your subject is moving, the shutter speed really does need to be fast enough to freeze it. When using a strobe, your shutter speed will be limited by the camera's max flash sync speed. And most like DSLRs, it's around 1/200th of a second, maybe 1/250th of a second. So that's usually the highest speed you can go when you're using a flash. But faster subjects need a faster shutter speed. Slower subjects, you can get away with a slower shutter speed. So for wide angle reef scenes, typically I, shooting around 1/100th of a second. At that speed, it tends to freeze a lot of the fish that are kind of milling about or swimming through the frame. You can go slower, which I do if it's lower light situation, but you may get some blur, some of those little fish that are moving more quickly around the frame. For macro with the flash, I'm usually shooting like 1/200th of a second shutter speed. I will drop that way down if I'm trying to get blue water behind the macro subject. And so it's something that you can do, but you just have to be aware of it and try to keep things as still as possible. Again, what I said here, the speeds vary depending on the subject and the desired background. If I'm going for a black background or a blue water background. Shooting your camera in auto mode will often result in the camera selecting a slow shutter speed that will cause too much blur. And so that's a disadvantage of possibly using auto mode or program mode on your cameras. So this is an example of Mr. Potato Head. He's actually swinging, he's hanging by a little rope or string, and he's sort of swinging like a pendulum. And this is just at 1/30th of a second shutter speed. And this is a close-up of the image just to show you kind of what motion blur looks like. It has a distinctive look to it. And I'm showing this because it's important to understand when you have a problem with the sharp image, it's important to be able to go look at that image and decide what went wrong. Over the years, I've had many people ask me about their focus problems, and then they show me their images, and it's immediately noticeable that it's not a focus problem. It's actually a shutter speed problem. They're shooting at too low a shutter speed for their subject. And so it's an important thing to sort of know how it looks. And there's some directionality to it. You can usually see it. And then next, we're moving on here to high ISO noise. The higher you set the ISO, the more noise will be in the image. Today, a lot of the new modern cameras can handle really high ISO without a problem. But it's important for you to know what your camera will do at higher ISO settings. That way you can determine what is the highest acceptable noise for you and know how high to consider your maximum ISO. For underwater, typically I'm using lower ISOs, 200 to 400, except under special conditions. And those would be where I need to get a really high shutter speed or it's a very low light situation. Then I'll crank that ISO up quite a bit higher. So here's again, Mr. Potato Head. I've used Mr. Potato Head in a lot of my talks over the years on everything from lighting to sharpness to composition. I have pictures of Mr. Potato Head. So this is ISO 100. This is the older camera I have, a D70-100, because these are older photos. But there's not much noise there. And then we crank it up to 2000. And I hope this translates onto your computers via Zoom. But if you particularly look in the shadow areas where you can really see the noise, like on the lower part of his nose. So this is the ISO 100, ISO 2000. Okay, it's a pretty substantial difference. Again, 100, 2000. So onto our next cause of unsharp images is excessive cropping. I have judged the DUPS photo contests on and off for many years. And this is one thing I see a lot in the novice category is that people really are cropping way too much. And, it causes a loss of detail on kind of pixelated images. Some suggestions don't overcrop. Another thing is you're shooting a compact digital that has what they call a digital zoom. You're probably better off turning that off and just cropping on the computer because that is basically cropping in the camera by using that digital zoom. If you get closer, you won't have to crop as much. And again, get closer is a really important thing to hear over and over in underwater photography. And there's so much truth to that. It really is important to get closer. So the question also was, okay, well, how many pixels do I need if I'm going to crop? You know, how far can I crop? You know, if you have a really high pixel count camera, like a newer one, I think Sony now maybe has a 100 megapixel DSLR out. But when I made this slide, you know, a year or so ago, it was 61 megapixels was their high-end one. So you can obviously crop a lot more if you have all those megapixels than if you have a 12 megapixel compact camera. But what you do with your image is really what will determine how many pixels you need. And here are some different numbers. This is, again, probably a year old. So if they're outdated now, they changed them, I apologize. But, you know, Facebook is 2048 pixels on the longest side. Instagram is 1080 pixels wide. The full HD display, you can read the numbers, 1920 by 1080. And then the 4K display is 3840 by 2160. So if you're not going to make a giant print of the image and you're just going to post it on Instagram or something, you can probably crop it a lot more than you would otherwise. So in excessive cropping, this is kind of just an example of what it looks like when you crop too much. Everything gets soft and a little blotchy. And again, another example of excessive cropping. So what could be worse than an image degradation caused by high ISO or excessive cropping? Well, doing both at the same time. That's when you really start running to nasty problems with your image. So if you know your subject will require heavy cropping, try to use a low ISO as possible. So like shooting birds, for example, I know it's not underwater, but a lot of times when you're shooting birds and you know that little bird you're going to crop in a lot, if you're shooting at a higher ISO, it's just going to amplify all that high ISO noise. So try to keep that in mind while you're shooting. So now we're talk about focus. So first thing when you're dealing with focusing is really is important to have good eyes. You know, if you can't see properly underwater and through your housing, then it's really difficult to get good focus on your subject. So if you need corrective lenses underwater, wear them. Another thing is to adjust your camera's viewfinder diopter if you have one. I'll show you what that looks like in a second here. And then the optional enhanced viewfinders, the big viewfinders you can get as an option on many housings, is really does provide a larger, brighter view through the camera, and it can be quite beneficial. I don't have one currently, but my eyes are getting older, and I feel the need for one pretty soon. And also using a focus light with a wide beam with adjustable output power and available red light is also a big benefit for helping you see underwater when you're trying to focus on subjects. So this is a viewfinder diopter I mentioned. So if you have corrective lenses that you wear, you can adjust your camera basically to compensate for those corrective lenses so you don't have to wear your glasses when you're photographing. And so it'll correct the camera as you're looking through it. So if you need that, if you have that on your camera, you may want to play with it. And also, if you ever put your camera up to your eye and you realize that you can't see, nothing's in focus, you may want to check that that hadn't gotten moved by accident. Again, a focus light, I have one of these lights. Years ago, I remember some people were buying, you know, these $300 or $400 focus lights, and I thought, oh, that's a big crock. I would never need something like that. I don't get the point of it. And then I guess in 2016, I got a really nice focus light, and I was like, oh, I get it now. I really like the variable output, so you can turn the power down quite a bit. And also, particularly at night dives with certain critters, the red light is really beneficial. Like I noticed that cephalopods and crustaceans tend not to be afraid of the red light. And so that helps a lot when photographing them. So a bit about autofocus. You know, most autofocus systems need two things to work properly: light and contrast. And the focus lights not only can help your eyes, but they can also help the autofocus system of your camera really do its job by having a little extra light to work with. So I feel like I'm talking to no man out there. Hopefully someone's still there. Because again, if you have questions, feel free to shout out. Enhanced viewfinder, as I mentioned a moment ago, these are a couple examples, and these are the optional viewfinders that go on your housings. They come in a 45-degree type setup or the straight 180 to go straight through the camera. And they can really help see and focus on your subjects. most cameras have multiple focus modes to select from. It's important that you learn what these different modes do on your camera. One way to do that is just go on YouTube and search for your particular camera model and then type the word autofocus. And you'll find a lot of good videos probably on your camera about how to set up and configure those different focus modes. The key important thing is always know with what focus mode you are shooting and how that focus mode will handle your particular situation. There are two basic things to consider when setting up the focus on your camera is the mode. So you can choose between, or typically you can choose between single or continuous autofocus. And then also the focus area. And there's a lot of different names that different camera manufacturers have for the focus areas. But basically they're like, you know, looking at the full frame and let the camera decide where to focus, or you can select a smaller group of portion of the frame and let the camera decide which one of those to pick, or you can yourself select a single point and have the camera focus only on that single point. So underwater, I use a Nikon D7200. On land, I use a D500. And it has 153 different focus points, okay? And 55 of those are usually selectable. So you can, you know, push the little arrow around the screen and select whichever one you want out of those 55. And just kind of for grins, I thought, you know, I'd show my first DSLR was a Nikon D100. I think I had that thing in like 2004 or something maybe. It had a whole 5 focus points that you could select from. So things have changed a whole lot in the 15 years or so. So these are some of the different kind of setups that the camera will allow you to select from. You can have a single point that you can move around the screen. Again, you push that little arrow in the back of the little, I can't remember what that thing's called, the little up and down, left, right arrows on the back of the camera to move that little focus point around so it's on your subject, okay? And then you can set it up to just a few of these points and the camera will pick one of those points all the way up to the whole screen, basically, where the camera will go through and select whatever point it thinks it needs to be in focus. One I do use for birding, flying birds, I'll use what's called a group autofocus. So it will select from these points. And that is quite handy when trying to catch really fast action of flying birds. But underwater, typically I'm using this, one point that I can move around. So I think it's important to use the smallest focus area that allows you to reliably keep focus on the critical part of the subject, okay? And so if you really cannot do that with one point, and you have to go to some of the other larger formats, then you can do it. The larger focus area you select gives the camera more power to willy-nilly select what is important to have in focus. And I don't necessarily want the camera willy-nilly selecting what is in focus. I think there are some new cameras out now that actually will detect the eyes of animals, not just people, but animals. And so that could be quite beneficial. I think the Canon R6 is one that does that. And from what I understand, you know, it can see the eye of a bear or a bird or whatever and actually track focus on that. So that may be a different situation if you have a camera that can do that. So these are some little examples I shot of my daughter when I was doing a different program for a topside photography club, but it demonstrates the point well. So when I set up my D500 into the 55-point dynamic focus mode, it's going to look at the scene and pick any of those 55 points and decide where to focus. And what's done is focused on the brim of the sombrero, okay, and not on my daughter's face. But obviously that's not what I wanted. And so by picking a single point, okay, so it's focused right here. But by picking a single point focus, I can put that on my daughter's eyes and focus where I want it to actually focus. And this is why I like to have the single point used in most of my photography, because I want to control exactly where it's focusing. And so just because you use a single point doesn't mean it's always the answer, right? So here's a picture of my wife took of me several years ago, and it was set up to a single point in the center. And obviously the center was on that hotel in the background, and it did a great job of focusing where it was supposed to, but just not on the subject. And so my wife had to reshoot it again by moving the focus point over to me. And I just always use these photos as an example that they just happened by accident. And so again, the single point, you know, when you're dealing with things underwater, a lot of times there are distracting elements and particularly foreground elements. So, you know, I really wanted to get the focus of the orangutan crab here on his eyes. And if I was probably using anything but that manual single point selection, more than likely it would have picked one of these other points to focus on. And so it wouldn't quite have been the same. And again, another example, this is a megalopa crab. It's like a little crab larvae. It's about the size of a pea. It's tiny. This is on a blackwater dive. And again, I'm just trying to focus on the eye. And you can tell I focused on this eye, and this eye is not quite as sharp. But had I not picked that single point, I'm sure the camera would have picked up this here area to focus on. And then the eyes would have been quite soft at that point. So in addition to the different focus areas, you also have the focus modes, and most cameras should have continuous or single. There are different names like Nikon calls it AFC or AF continuous, and then Canon calls it AI servo. And this is basically while the shutter is pressed halfway, the camera will continuously focus. So if you're moving the camera around the room, holding that shutter halfway, the camera will be continuously focusing in and out, depending on what it's aimed at. And then the other major option there is the single autofocus. So Nikon calls it AFS, and I think Canon may call it one-shot autofocus. So that's when the shutter is pressed halfway down, the camera focuses and it locks focus as long as that shutter is held half depressed. So with that, you can focus on something and then maybe recompose the shot while the focus is locked there and then shoot the photo. So in the past, with older cameras, a lot of times I would use the single autofocus. And so I would lock the focus and recompose the shot and then shoot it. But now, you know, the newer cameras, the autofocus on continuous has gotten so good that typically I am now, for even stationary subjects, I will use the AFC autofocus continuous mode, and then I'll move that focus point around to line up on the eye of my subject and shoot it. And the good thing about using that continuous in this sort of situation, even with the stationary subject, is that if I'm moving a little bit with surge or current or what have you, that autofocus will be continuously changing based on my distance to the subject until I squeeze that trigger to shoot the photos. And so that tends to help keep things in focus a bit, especially if you have a little surge or movement. So again, you just, you know, move that focus point over to your subject's eye and shoot away. And then for focus for moving subjects, I'm doing the same thing. I had these two slides because I used to do it differently, but now I'm basically using continuous autofocus for most things underwater. As long as I have time to move that little point around on the screen there. And then with some subjects, I use back button focus. Just out of curiosity, how many of y'all use back button focus for underwater? Anybody say yes?
Me.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. I do some. I have a problem with my housing in that if I'm holding with one hand, I have difficulty holding the housing stable when I'm trying to pull the shutter and use the back button focus. And so if I'm using two hands on my housing, I will use back button focus quite regularly. But if I'm in a situation where I'm only using one hand, like I'm using a muck stick, for example, I have difficulty holding my housing and getting that back button. So I just can't really hold it stable when I have my thumb on that back button focus. But like for birds and stuff, I use back button focus all the time. But I suggest you look into it on your particular camera and housing. If you have it, how do you set it up? And then play with it some and see what you think. See if it's beneficial for you. You know, basically, I think I have another, well, let me get to it. I think I have another slide that talks about back button in a minute. So again, a moving subject example, you know, like all these antheists are hanging in the current and they're all aiming, you know, toward the right, maybe a little upward. So you know that you can move your focus point up in this side of the frame, this corner of the frame, to give you more space for the fish. And so it's something that just kind of takes a little pre-planning. And once you start moving that focus point around a lot, you get really good at it. When you see a subject and you're swimming over there to it, you get good at starting to manipulate that focus point on your way to the subject. And again, just, you know, moving that focus point over to the right side to give room for that fish instead of having that point dead center. So talking about focusing and how to focus, where to focus. I have some fine artwork here, as you can see, to show some examples about where to focus and how the camera acts. So this is a subject, it's totally flat to the camera. It's very easy. You can focus anywhere on fish pretty much, and the eye is going to be in focus. Everything's easy. Okay. So this little red box indicates my focus point. And then now the subject is 45 degrees to the camera. So if you're still going with the center spot, we're starting to run into problems because yes, the center spot is in focus, but now the eye is thrown out of focus because anything closer than your point of focus is really suffers and becomes out of focus. So, and then now if you have one of the modes in your camera selected that it's going to choose to focus on the closest part of your subject, we still have a problem because now it's trying to focus on the nose of the fish, the front end of the fish here, because it's closer to the camera, but the eye again is out of focus and suffering. And so it's really important to get that focus point on the subject's eye. Okay. Does it all make sense, I hope? So here we go, just an example, you get the eye in focus, the mouth can go a little bit out, the tail can go a little bit out, but it's really that eye that we're looking at for getting sharp focus on. So a lot of times they're very, very small macro subjects, particularly if they're stationary ones. A lot of times I'll zoom in, I'll focus on my hand and move my hand closer and closer to my camera until I reach the maximum or the minimum focus point, basically closest as my camera will focus. And then I use the focus lock feature. And then I'll go over to my subject and I'll just slowly move in and out until I see those eyes come into focus. And that's when I'll squeeze the shutter. Okay. That's come in handy a lot of times when it's difficult to focus on a subject, or it's just too small or not contrasty enough. It's been a good technique for me over the years. The same technique can also be used on cameras that have focus peaking. Does anybody out there have a camera with focus peaking? I know some of the compacts have it, and mirrorless cameras is pretty popular nowadays. So when using manual focus mode, focus peaking will highlight areas of sharp focus and a selected color on the display. So that way you can make sure that the eyes of your subject are in focus by using the focus peaking. This I put in as an example of just trying to come up with other ways to solve problems when you're trying to compose and focus. This is a silky shark, was out at Socorro on a night snorkel, and they wouldn't let us wear weight on our belts on this night snorkel. And so I'm bobbing around the surface in a 7mm neoprene wetsuit, and I'm really having a difficult time looking through the viewfinder to compose as these sharks are swimming past me. And so finally what I did was I just put my camera, I flipped the switch, I focused about a foot in front of, just on my hand, and then I flipped the switch into manual focus so that the focus would not change. And I just waited for the sharks to get within about a foot, and I just looked over the camera and just held it up, shotgun style. And I got quite a few nice shots doing that, probably more than I would have gotten by trying to look through the viewfinder. And again, it's just, trying to come up with a solution when you are, greeted with a problem like that. And that's very forgiving on a fisheye lens. You can never do that with a macro, but with a fisheye lens, it has, a pretty forgiving amount of depth of field. And so I got quite a few decent, nice, sharp shots on that nice snorkel. So yeah, back button autofocus we talked about briefly a moment ago. It basically works as both single and continuous autofocus modes because it's continuous as long as you're pushing on that button. And then once you let go of the button, it stops focusing. So it's fixed at that point. And so it basically works with the same modes we were talking about earlier, the area modes, and it separates the focus control from the shutter control. So now your shutter lever is only for taking pictures, and then that back button, focus button, is the one you use to focus with. So it's just a different way of shooting. It does take some getting used to, but like I said, if your camera has it, I suggest you experiment with it and see what you think. But a key takeaway on all the focus talk is that it's really critical that you know what focus mode you're shooting with, what area you're dealing with, and how it will handle your particular subject. So a lot of times people are shooting their cameras, they don't even know what focus mode they're in. They have no idea. So it's really important to understand that in advance. A little about GoPro. I think most all the GoPro newer ones don't have the problem. I know some of the earlier ones, like my first one was a GoPro 2, and it had a little dome port, but that dome port would actually not focus properly underwater. And so all your underwater images or video were all a little bit out of focus. So you had to get either a different housing, or you could buy a flat port to put onto the, to replace that dome port. But anyways, so I think that's not much of an issue anymore. But there is no adjustable focus on your GoPro. GoPro's camera has a wide angle lens really suited for, you know, wide scenes and big subjects. But I see a lot of times new divers with their GoPro, and they're trying to get video of a nudibranch, and they're putting the GoPro like 2 inches from the nudibranch. But unfortunately, they're not going to focus that close unless you have a diopter. And so if you're trying to get, you know, a foot or closer, you really need to have that macro diopter for your GoPro. And this is just an example of the one that Backscatter has. So what about depth of field? We can't really talk about sharpness without talking about depth of field a bit. I'm gonna do a review here. It's probably all know this, but I still feel like I need to talk about it briefly. So f-stop is the size of the opening or aperture in your lens. It lets light travel through to reach the sensor. Smaller numbers equal larger openings, equal more light let into the sensor. Larger numbers like f22 or f16 is actually a smaller opening and lets less light into the sensor. So the f-stop impact on depth of field is that the depth of field, which is the portion of the image in front of and behind the actual point of focus that is still sharp, okay? The smaller apertures, like a high f-stop number, f22 or f16, will have a much greater depth of field in your image. And it's a trade-off because these small apertures also let in the least light, okay? They do have the most depth of field, but let in the least light. So this is just an example. Again, it's an old photo I've used in presentations over the years. This was like 2006 or 7. This is our exchange student and my niece. So at f4, you can see she's in focus, but my niece there in the background is not. But at f16, they're both acceptably in focus. So it really does make a big difference. And macro, the difference is even more noticeable. So on the left, you see f4, the camera's focused at 4 inches. This is I think a 60 or maybe the 105mm macro lens. And then at f16, you can see again, focused at 4 inches, we get quite a bit more depth of field. Over here at f4, it's so small, it's hardly any depth of field. So depth of field can also be impacted by the distance of the camera to the subject. The closer you are, you're gonna have less apparent depth of field. The focal length of the lens, the longer the lens, you'll have less apparent depth of field. And then the sensor size also. With other variables being constant, smaller sensors actually offer more depth of field. So if you shoot a compact, a lot of times you can get more depth of field in your image than if you're shooting a full frame camera. So it's important that you have that depth of field really working on your subject where it needs to be. So this is a little blenny on the Gulf of Mexico on an oil rig, and they're probably about the size of my pinky, I'd say. But you can see the focus is actually over here. I missed it. So the eye is not sharp. And you can see the teeth on the far side are sharp, but the teeth on the close side are not, okay? And so just a teeny bit of depth of field there because you're dealing with a higher magnification in the macro lens. But you can see, you know, the difference it makes when you actually get to focus in the right spot here on the eye that's on the close side, okay? And you got the teeth in focus close to the frame. But that focus does fall off very quickly. You can see this little antenna is quite a bit out of focus. And I'm pretty sure this is probably like f16 or f18. So it's important, again, to use the depth of field to fit your subject. You can do everything else right, but your depth of field really doesn't cover the critical area of your subject. The image can still be a failure, okay? Even if you have good focus somewhere on your subject, but important parts of it go out of focus, it's still not good. So you need to understand the plane of focus and how it fits your subject. This is really an important issue in macro shots. So, you know, here we got this crocodile fish. The focus is on his eyes, and I've kind of lined up so his eyes are both equal distance from the camera. So the plane of focus, you know, is traveling right across here. So everything at this distance is going to be in focus. Obviously, the front of his mouth is out of focus, and it's traveling down his body. His dorsal fin and tail are really out of focus, right? So, you know, a lot of times by placing your subjects so they're more flat to the camera, you can get everything in focus that you want to see. And, you know, like, that sounds really boring when you say making it flat to the camera. So one thing I do a lot is when I can, I put things on the diagonal, okay? And so yes, it's flat to the camera, but the diagonal gives it a little life to it, basically, a little action kind of going on. You know, if you were to shot this from a different angle, maybe a portion of this would be in focus, but then the other portion of it would not. So it's just making choices and understanding your depth of field and how it will work with your subject. And again, focus straight on, you get the eyes in focus, and the thing starts to fade out as you get away. Same again, just sort of getting straight so both the eyes are equal distance from the camera. And so here is, I was really excited about this. I've always seen photos like this of these peacock manna shrimp, but I never had one that would let me get close. And then back in January, February in the Philippines, I had this guy wasn't phased at all. I was not afraid of me a bit. I was focusing on this eye, which you can tell because it's nice and crisp, and the other eye is not quite as sharp as I would like it to have been. And again, that depth of field is so small when you're really dealing with these small macro subjects that it's really important to have them both on the same plane of focus. So I wish I had another do-over on this guy. Maybe next time. Stargazer, you know, I see a lot of pictures of stargazers where the mouth is real sharp, but the eyes are a little out of focus, or the eyes are sharp, but the mouth is out of focus. And it really is a very small different change of angle can make a big difference when shooting this type of subject. So it's important to kind of angle it a little bit so that the mouth and the eyes are on that same plane to get them all in focus, all three parts, this eye, that eye, and the mouth. And I shoot a lot of, you probably saw on my slideshow, like what I call texture shots, just like, you know, close-ups of corals and things like that. And again, when I shoot these, I look for an area that allows me to shoot to get a lot of that subject on the same plane of focus. Okay, so my focus is going from here to here, basically. And because of the layout of this particular crinoid, it had this section of it that was all kind of flat to my camera. So it allowed me to get a lot of that in focus. So I mentioned earlier, to improve your sharpness in your images, it's important that you understand, you know, what the cause is of your less than sharp images. And so here's some little tips about how to diagnose issues that you may be experiencing. You know, focus issues usually have, you know, some area of the image that is sharp. It may just not be the part you want it to be sharp. And that's telling you that, you know, you're not focusing on the right spot. Maybe you're using the wrong focus mode, or you're just not being careful enough. Shooting into too much water will have an overall soft or diffused look. High ISO or excessive cropping will have more, starting to get some visible pixels or blotches, causing softness in noisy areas. Motion blur also often will have some directionality to it. You know, if the whole image is blurry, it's called by the camera moving. If just a moving subject is blurry, it's called by the subject movement. So like I said, it's important to understand, you know, what particular problems you're experiencing if you're going to try to fix them. And then a few other causes I'll touch on very briefly that cause soft images is chromatic aberration, crappy lenses, lens port compatibility issues, and dirty lenses or ports. So chromatic aberration is a common optical problem where all the wavelengths of colors are not focused on the same plane. This is when you're shooting through glass or plastic, you know, lenses and ports. This is most prominent on really hard edges, like going from a real dark to real light. So if you have like a black and white stripe thing, you can a lot of times see that chromatic aberration in there. And it's sort of splitting up the colors. Shooting through ports and diopters also can add to this problem. And you
David,
can
could I make a couple of comments on that?
Hello?
Yeah, one of them is that you're going to see chromatic aberration more in the corners, especially because the light is coming in at a much more acute angle. Yeah. And you're going to see it more likely with flat ports than you are going to be with dome ports, because the angle hitting the port is worse in the flats. Yeah.
And so you can correct that in Lightroom. There's some auto correction for particular lenses. And that's a pretty simple thing to do, but that will not take into account your port. But it's something to look for. And you know, this is being really picky. If you're dealing with your image on such detail that you're worried about chromatic aberration. Everything else before that had to be really good and sharp. Okay. So lenses, you know, there's all different lenses, you know, cheap ones, expensive ones, and there definitely is different quality of lenses. Some are a lot more sharp than others. And most lenses will have some sweet spots where they're the most sharp. Usually it's somewhere in the middle of f-stop range. Very rarely do you have a lens that's the sharpest at wide open f-stop or the smallest f-stop. There are a lot of lens reviews and tests online that you can get some good information from. This website here at the bottom, DxO Mark, they have like really, really extensive detailed lens tests. And so if you're seriously considering buying a lens and you want to make sure it's going to be money well spent, you can go look at their tests there and see how that lens is performed. Lens and port compatibility. You know, there's a lot of people just willy-nilly put a lens inside of a port without really giving it much consideration. And if you're trying to put a particular lens inside a dome port, sometimes they're not really compatible. And so you really need to make sure that the setup you're trying to use is optimal and will give you a good sharp image. Some lenses will require diopters to use behind a particular dome port. And so a lot of times if you have an image, maybe you notice that your image is sharp in the middle, but as you get out to the edges, everything seems to be blurry. That could very well be a problem with the dome port not matching well with your lens. Clean lenses and ports, you know, I've seen over the years many times with ports, dome ports or macro ports, just, you know, so dirty and smudged up and dusty on the inside. And it's like, you know, here you go, you got a really expensive camera rig and you got so much dust in there or what have you, smudges from silicone grease, that there's no way you can get a decent shot through that thing. So, you know, it is very difficult to clean the inside of a dome port. So it's a lot easier to keep them clean in the first place. So, you know, always store them with covers, the back port cover. And then I also put them in Ziploc bags because it's no fun trying to clean the inside of a dome port. And those silicone grease covered fingers are a big problem in handling camera lenses and ports. So just try to be really aware and not get that silicone grease on your lens or something. Obviously, you know, editing can do a lot to help sharpen your image. Adjusting contrast, texture, clarity, and sharpening will help contribute to the crispness of your images. There are a lot of good tutorials online for sharpening. And Go Ask Aaron, I mentioned, there's one here I thought was really particularly good. So if you go to goaskaaron.com and just search detail oriented in the search box, you'll find that particular tutorial video on sharpening. And there's another one that she has, it's on texture versus clarity versus the dehaze sliders in Lightroom. And you can also find that one at Go Ask Aaron. So if you don't know how to do some sharpening and things to your image, there's no excuse for not learning because there are so many good videos online to learn that information. Okay, that's it. Questions?
Yeah, I have one, David.
If anybody,
Actually,
anybody awake?
It's a question for everybody here. Are you aware of a suite of programs by Topaz Laboratories?
I've heard talk of it, but I don't know anything about it.
I bought the whole suite.
Yeah.
And especially good for sharpening and removing background noise and things like that from, for instance, high ISO noise. And they have sliders, so you can use a little bit or a lot depending on the issue. I found that for some photographs, it does an amazing job, especially things that are really good photos, but they're flawed for whatever reason, maybe because of high ISO. You can take out a lot of the noise, and it also does a very, very good job of like an automatic sharpening as well. Just a point there, my experience.
Okay, Topaz. Any other questions out there?
Jim here. On the chromatic aberration, I see some of my photos will have a purple edge to the subject. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
That's it.
That's it.
It's purple, green, red, pink.
And there's a remove chromatic aberration that you can use, in Lightroom to help with that. And I second Dennis Davenport's idea. I use that Topaz denoise AI. I don't have the whole suite, but I really like that denoise AI.
Yeah, it's an excellent program. The chromatic aberration can also be controlled directly out of camera raw, converting your raw over to an editable in Photoshop, for instance.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Questions? Marty, you stuck around. Aren't you sleeping by now?
No, I'm learning.
Well, I appreciate you sticking around.
No,
You're gonna get real tired of us by tomorrow night.
I wonder, one thing that did go through my head about is that, I was trying to figure out if it's a sharpness thing or just camera motion, but I think one of the mistakes I made for a long time is getting excited about taking a picture and kind of jerking the camera. And that I grew up, hunting, and I was always taught to squeeze a trigger. And it finally dawned on me that I think that can lead to some sharpness issues as well. Just a thought I had.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's totally true. Especially on the housings, they have the big levers for pulling that shutter. I know there was a period there where I was pushing my housing to my finger instead of pulling my finger. Does that make sense? And I really had to consciously think, just squeeze the finger gently. And I need to add it to my presentation. That's a very good point.
It will also make me where I noticed it first is I would be needing to recompose a picture, because that jerk would kind of move my subject, especially in macro subjects. It would move it to the edge of the frame. So just something I picked up on.
When you're doing little macro stuff, that can make a big difference, a little movement. Good point.
I've got another question on center weighted. I use a center focal point, and do you move that point? In other words, let's say the eye is off, the upper left corner of the frame. You actually have the time to move that?
I mean, it's always subject dependent, of course, but yes, when I do have time, I'll move it. If I see something coming at me quickly and it's going this direction, I know immediately start moving that focal point over to the right side. Does that make sense? And the more you do it, the more you get used to doing it. And so, not always do you have time to do that. And that's why in the past, I always used the center point and single servo. So it was, or single focus. So it was, I focus once a lock and I can recompose and shoot it. But now that the, continuous autofocus has gotten so good and so fast, and I've gotten a lot better moving that little focus point around, I try to do that whenever possible.
And you can do that in your housing?
Yeah. Yeah. It has that little big round thing on the back, go up, down, left, right.
The joystick.
Well, it's not that. I have it on my D500. It has the 4 buttons plus a joystick, but on my housing, it's just like a round knob that you can push at any angle, basically.
Oh, okay.
So I'm shooting a D7000 with a Nauticam housing, and I was not aware of that functionality, so I'll have to look at that.
Oh, I'm assuming it has the same on that one, because even my old camera had that functionality. So
I shoot with the D7000, and it has that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're just trying to get a grab shot and leaving it in the center, it's fine. But if you're really trying to get a good composition, tightly framed, and really focus on the eye, you want to try to move that around when you can. Anybody else?
I have a cropping question.
Okay.
If you're shooting in RAW as well as JPEG, and then you bring it into Lightroom and you want to do your crop, but you resample the size so you have more pixels to work with, doesn't that solve the problem?
That's a Dennis question. I don't ever resample mine, so I don't know.
Well, resampling, going to more pixels depends on what you use to improve the number of pixels. Topaz has a very special program called Gigapixel that can up-res any photo, even something really low resolution, will give you excellent results at higher resolution. It's not a cheap date, but boy, does it do a super job.
Have you ever done it in Lightroom?
I don't use Lightroom, I use Photoshop.
Okay.
But I use Photoshop, and I think there's similar algorithms.
Yeah, I don't know, because if I'm going to do something in Photoshop, I'm going to do everything I can in Lightroom and then bring it into Photoshop first, you know. So does anybody else use Lightroom enough to know? Like, I've taken a really good shot, and I want to print it in a large format, bigger than 14 by 11. Okay. If I want to put something on the wall in the living room, then I'm going to take that raw image in Lightroom and tell it that I want it to be at that size, 20 by 30, whatever size I want it to be, but I want it to be more pixels.
I do not think Lightroom does that, or at least it didn't in the old days. Maybe it does now, but I don't think it does it.
Photoshop uses bicubic as its algorithm. I would assume that Lightroom does the same. They're both Adobe products. But you say no?
Well, I'm still using Lightroom 6, and I know it does not. So, but Photoshop does. I don't know what Lightroom's up to now, but maybe.
And mine's newer than 6. I just don't remember what the number is.
Actually, your printer will do the up-resing for you. I use several commercial labs to make large prints, and they tell us not to up-res our images, to have them at regular size, and then they will put that image within their software and just tell the printer to print out at 20 by 24, and the printer does that. So you're not going to be able to tell the difference. If you're running something even on a 16 by 24 home printer, you're not going to tell the difference. So you don't need to really up-res it. Just tell your printer that you want the image to be 16 by 24 or whatever.
Or you just trust the printer to do the right thing, because if I'm doing something that large, I'm not printing it myself.
Well, exactly. But what I'm saying is the printer is going to do the up-resing for you. You don't have to tell Photoshop or Lightroom, go ahead and make this image a 16 by 20 to print a 16 by 20. You'll never tell the difference because there's when the ink hits the paper, there's so much diffusion anyway. The ink runs out to the side, and so you're just not going to tell the difference unless you're doing something that's 3 feet by 4 feet. Yes, you're going to tell the difference then. So you are going to have some up-resing, and there are programs that will do that. And
the limiting factor is really your eyes and what it can discern. So the larger, the more pixels you have to have. The further away it is, the less pixels you need.
Right. Billboards are often 2 pixels per inch to say exactly what you're saying, but you're not going to be 3 feet away from a billboard to look at it.
Right. Good. Right. Thanks, guys.
Yes, thank you. Dave, if we look.
Good questions. Anybody else?
I have one comment, and that would be that tomorrow at the same time at 6:30, DUPS down here in Houston has Marty going to be speaking about diving in Philippines at the Atlantis resorts. I guess that's the subject, right?
It is true, and it's the exact same subject I spoke to the DUPS group about a month ago.
Okay, I was going to invite everybody.
Yeah, so well, I hope we are invited because there's several of us that did not make the presentation or that liked the presentation enough to hear it again. So
yeah, and Barry, I'll make sure that I send out all the information to you, and it's going to be on our DUPS Facebook page as well.
Wonderful. And we're all
Thank you,
invited to be
Dennis.
on the HUPS Facebook page, as you guys have been joining the DUPS page.
Well, I have a technical question. Is it dupes or dups?
We call it DUPS
Oops.
because it was more like a duplication of a slide. And when we did it, that's all there was.
Okay.
And
And it sounds better.
So
yeah,
is HUPS still HUPS or is it now hoops or what?
Dave, can I ask you a question? Do you know if the Houston Underwater Film Festival is still going to take place on April 17th?
That's a good question. We'll probably have a meeting about that very soon.
No, but it's not.
Yeah. I don't think we haven't announced that, have we? I think we're going to try to do an online, is the last I heard. Is that what you know, Tom?
I believe that's correct.
Try to do
But-
a online film festival like San Diego did this year.
Right. Because we've already booked 22.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to meet with the board with this new website that I'm working with. That's just so awesome and has so many capabilities for streaming.
Huh. Okay.
Dennis and I talked about it very briefly a few months back, and it's really a nice, stable platform for what we're wanting to do.
Okay.
I don't know what Betsy and Craig have planned for this, but I think that we all see the handwriting on the wall. It's
Yeah.
not going to happen just because the vaccines aren't out there enough, and social distancing isn't enough.
So
Oh, Dennis, you got to get in line, Dennis. You got to be proactive and get in line.
Oh, I've got my first one. My second one's coming.
Good. Okay, I feel better for you now.
Sorry. You know, I happen to live in San Diego and I'm involved with the San Diego group. I don't know if you've talked with them or not, but when we did it last fall, or they did, I shouldn't say we, I don't really do anything but go watch the movies. But, you know, they were a little uncomfortable about how it was going to work, and they thought they had great success. They had a lot of viewership. They left the films up over an extended period of time, but I think it was for a week or something, but they had viewers from all over the world, and it was really successful. And if you don't, I don't know if you know Cheryl Dean,
Yeah, we
San
met her.
Diego, but I'm sure she'd be happy to talk with you about what San Diego did.
Betsy's been in contact with them, yes.
And that's about the extent of my knowledge, so I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you for your input.
Yes.
So yeah, we have dates already for 2022. So hopefully things will be under control by then, and we'll have one in person at a really nice venue in Houston also.
Great. I'll start working on my next video.
Awesome. Well, good. All right, I think that's it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Great job, David.
Thank you. Yeah. Dave?
Thank you, David.
Sure thing.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Generally, what we do is, generally we rate the speakers on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm going to give you an 11. Absolutely, an absolutely fantastic job, and very, very interesting, and well worth of many emails that you and I send back and forth to each other.
All right, well, good, good.
Yes,
Again,
definitely.
guys,
Thank you so much. Yes.
Really.
take care.
And so everybody, DUPS members, don't forget, you have until Wednesday noon to vote. I believe it's noon on Wednesday, isn't it? Or did you?
Yes, sir.
To break this four-way tie we've got in the open division. So be sure and vote so we can get those done, and we'll get up the winners, and be sure and look at the newsletter, read it. We've got some neat things we hope that are coming up in that. And before we actually started the meeting formally tonight, we talked about the possibility of starting back in April for meetings at Outback. And Marty made a good point. That's only 5-6 weeks away. So we'll just have to look and see how things go and how many people are vaccinated by that time. I know a bunch of people are. Several people mentioned tonight they've already had their second one. So this is better than not doing a meeting at all. And this is wonderful. It's so, we're
Love
so glad
seeing
to see everybody. Yeah. Yeah. It's so nice to see everyone again. And I was thinking, Ruth and I were talking earlier today about so many things that we have not done in the last year that we're not really losing interest in, but kind of losing interest in, kind of, oh, I don't know if I really want to start back doing that or doing this or whatever. And watching David's presentation tonight, got into about the 6th slide and I was going, okay, I'm ready to go back to the Philippines. I wonder if Marty can set up another trip. So thank you. That was wonderful. And I'm sure he could. But
you give me the name of your book. I need to be able to get to you guys so I can buy that book.
101 Tips for Underwater Photographers.
Yeah, but I mean, what's the site?
Wise Divers.
Wisedivers.com.
I didn't even have to write that down as a note, Marty.
Thanks for asking. And I should have told you guys, Barry helped me an awful lot. He has over the years. I've mentioned that before, but a bunch of the images and stuff in the book, he's always helping me make them better and look like I took them.
Oh, no. Well, thank you very much. And Eric, you and Marty both, thank you for presenting tonight and letting us our advertise, whatever you want to call it, for the Wise Guys. I hope it really works well for you. I'm sure there's going to be some interest. David, thank you again so much. That was excellent. If any of you saw the post on Facebook, Ken Knizik, an old time friend of many of us that used to go to Sea Space, said we were going to really be excited with David's presentation. And sure enough, we were. And thank all of you guys that came from HUPS. You say HUPS, right? Am I getting that right?
Ups.
Yeah, we're mixed up.
Yeah,
Well,
really.
we'll let you say
I only have one comment about David's presentation. Hasbro says it's no longer Mr. Potato Head. Can you believe that? I had to throw that in.
I figured that would come up somehow.
Yeah, this cancel culture is just too much. I'm
They're going to have extra parts in the box now.
All right.
By the way, we do have a workshop coming up. Is it the 6th, David?
Which workshop is that? I don't know.
The workshop that David and I are going to be giving with Craig Beasley, and we're going to be talking about negative space.
That was last weekend. That was 2 weekends ago before the freeze. You're lost.
You missed that, Dennis.
Dennis's brain froze. You did yours.
That was our photo contest this month, negative space.
Yeah.
We should have seen your workshop before.
I can't remember when our next workshop is, but it's a little down the road.
Do you do the DaVinci Resolve workshop anymore?
Not lately.
Okay.
I ran a course for that, I think, for now.
Well, we ran out of, there's only so many people do video, and there's no more novices, if you will.
Oh, well, we got some here in our group. Or some interested, not necessarily novice, but interested in learning new techniques. And you can never know too much. The masthead on our Dive Training magazine is a good diver is always learning, so.
Well, we started out with our workshops on that with a good dozen people. We ended up with just 4.
Gotcha.
So don't do it anymore.
I hear you. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. Really enjoyed it, and we can do more. We have our own DUPS Zoom legal license now, so we can do these anytime we want. Wow. Looking forward to seeing you guys soon. Somebody just posted a chat, I think.
Joe Gibson had to leave.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Good safe week, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.